Joseph, I don't know where else to start. What's a better place to start is with what's going on right now up on Parliament Hill. Now, I did a short Facebook video expressing my points of view, so I'm going to let you wade in with what you want to say about it.
I don't really want to say anything about it. Do we really have to talk about this? It just won't. Okay. Where do we start, Nick? I'm confused. How does that sound? How does that sound for starters?
That sounds like half the country.
I'm confused. I don't understand what's going on. Okay. First of all, let's back up and let's just sort of rehash how all of this started. SNC-Lavelin is a large Canadian construction company. It's an international company, does business around the world, very large infrastructure jobs, very large construction jobs, not just here in Canada, but around the world. It practices, as people probably are not surprised to learn, that there are kind of strange business practices that go on around the world in different countries. There are different standards, etc. So I'm not really well versed in understanding the intricacies of what SNC-Lavelin has been accused of doing, except to say that they're accused of doing some wrongdoing, and not necessarily in Canada, but I believe in Libya, something to do with sanctions, etc.
Yes, they were bribing Omar Gaddafi and his son.
Okay. So they are currently being investigated and possibly being prosecuted here in Canada for having violated some laws in Canada with respect to violating sanctions, etc. So the exact nature of what they've been accused of isn't really important. What is important is that there is a law in Canada, first of all, if they're convicted, if they're prosecuted and convicted, that they cannot then bid on Canadian contracts for X number of years.
If they're convicted.
If
10 years.
If they're convicted, it's 10 years.
Yes.
But there is a law, there is a way that allows large companies like SNC-Lavelin to have, it's called a deferred prosecution or a
deferred prosecution agreement.
Okay. Where they agree to pay a fine, but they're not barred from bidding on government contracts.
Right.
Okay. So it's the same thing as if they were convicted. Okay, because nobody's going to go to jail here. If there's a conviction, nobody's going to go to jail. SNC-Lavelin is going to pay a fine, and then they're going to get banned
if they qualify for this.
Okay, so here's the difference. If they don't qualify for this deferred prosecution, okay, then they go to trial, they're convicted, they pay a fine, and they can't bid on contracts for 10 years.
Right.
If they do go by this alternate route, they don't get convicted, but they do agree to pay a fine.
They pay a fine, admit guilt, say they're sorry, promise never to do it again.
And they get to bid on government contracts.
Yeah.
So either way, they're going to pay a fine. Okay.
Either way.
So the only question is, will they be allowed to bid on government contracts?
I think, because Joseph.
Okay, so that's. I'm just saying that's where we are right now.
Okay, all right, fine. Because first of all, the reason why the law is the way it is Justin Trudeau changed it. Now, I get the legalities of it. Okay, it's not about whether it should or should not have been done. He has the legal authority to do that.
Now, Justin Trudeau did not change anything. The Parliament of Canada changed something. I hate it when you put me in a position where I'm defending the Liberals.
Hold it.
But the government introduced legislation. Parliament voted. Now, maybe it was a straight party line vote, but that's the way our system works. So the law is the law is the law. Don't say, oh, Justin Trudeau changed the law. Justin Trudeau.
Okay, here's why I say that. Because he has a majority. Even if everybody on the other side of the House disagrees with it, he still gets his way.
He gets his way only if it's agreed to by the caucus, the Liberal caucus.
Okay, well,
and there's a whole process before a piece of legislation gets introduced into the House of Commons.
It's all a rubber stamp because nobody. Look, I understand the legality of it. What I'm trying to say is that I call it Justin Trudeau if you want to add the caveat and his ministers and caucus, fine, I can live with that. But he's the king, he's the chief poobah. We don't blame the navigator or the helmsman for the sinking of the Titanic. We blame Captain E.D. Smith because he was the guy in charge.
Okay.
Okay? That's where I'm coming from. So when I say that it's Trudeau, it's because he's the one that decided this was going to happen. He's the one that brought it to the table. The caucus voted on it knowing they were going to...
I'm just saying, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Okay,
it happened on his watch.
I don't disagree. Okay, but we don't have a presidential system here. Okay, we have cabinet government, and I don't know that this even originated with Justin Trudeau. It could very easily have originated with the finance minister. Okay, and he brings it to cabinet, and cabinet votes on it. And Justin Trudeau, his word goes, the prime minister's word goes a long way. Okay? But the prime minister alone can't get anything done. And it doesn't work that way in our system. But anyway, look, let's concede the point for a minute, okay? Because I'm still confused. Let's set aside all of this. The point is that whatever the origin of the law that allows for these deferred prosecutions, that's the law right now.
Yes.
Okay. So the Attorney General gets to talk to the head of the Public Prosecution Service from time to time, and these conversations go on, and so it's not in my judgments, it's not inappropriate for the Attorney General to discuss cases with the Public Prosecution Office.
But that's not who the discussion was between.
Hang on. Okay. So that's not unusual. It's not, in my view, it's not inappropriate. So the question now becomes whether or not the Prime Minister or other members of Cabinet or other members of the government discussed the case with the Attorney General and, here's the other question, pressured, quote unquote, the Attorney General, or recommended, or however you want to characterize it, the Attorney General to intervene to convince the Office of Public Prosecutions to avail themselves of this deferred prosecution process. Now, this is where I get confused, Nick. I'm not entirely convinced that that's totally inappropriate, because it's very different from talking to judges. When a case is before a judge and it's being adjudicated, okay, you absolutely don't communicate with the judges, okay? But before a case gets before a judge, there's prosecutorial discretion, and these discussions go on all the time. And the law, the way it's set up right now, in many cases, not just allows the Attorney General to intervene, to have discretion to intervene, but in some cases, okay, actually requires the Attorney General's approval, irrespective of what the Public Prosecution Office wants.
I understand all that.
Okay, so here's where I know you asked me for my view.
I did.
Okay, so
I'll stop
blame
walking
Nick.
on you. Go
blame
ahead.
Nick, people. Okay. Okay, so here it is. This is where I get confused. I get that people are upset about this. In the first instance, I get that people think it's not appropriate for the Prime Minister to discuss this with the Attorney General, or for the Attorney General to discuss this with the head of the Public Prosecution Service. I don't necessarily agree. I'm sort of sitting on the fence with it, but I understand the angst, okay? But I think it's a defensible position. I think it's defensible. I think the Prime Minister and the Attorney General and all these people get out there and say, we did nothing wrong. This is the way the system works. What I don't understand is, if they don't think they did anything wrong, why try to cover it up? That's what I don't understand. And it's clear after today's testimony by the former Attorney General that there was pressure put on her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not clear that pressure is wrong, but I am clear, absolutely clear, that the Prime Minister and and other members of the Prime Minister's office, including senior civil servants, seem to have lied about this. And I'm not quite understanding why they would lie about it if they didn't think that they'd done something wrong. And on top of all of that, if you've covered it up, then why do you turn around and say that the Attorney General can go ahead, or the former Attorney General can go ahead and testify to the Justice Committee and reveal all when she's bound by cabinet secrecy, caucus confidentiality, and attorney-client privilege? There are many aspects to this. Now, except the only here's my political, here I'm taking my tactical, now I'm putting on my tactical strategic hat, okay? The only explanation for me that makes any sense is that they're going, okay, did we do something wrong or not do anything wrong? I don't know, but we sure look like we've been covering it up. And this is going to get out of hand. So let's just bite the bullet, take the accusations that we've covered something up, okay? Accept the fact that people are going to say we covered up and just go on. Because we don't have to call an election for until October. And constitutionally, even though the fixed election date law makes the next election in October of this year, constitutionally, the government's not actually required to call an election. Okay, so they could go on until October or sometime in the fall of 2020 before they actually have to call an election. So, I'm not one of those people that's already thinking, okay, the government, this is terrible, the government's going to fall, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. I have to wait and see whether or not I think they're going to be able to withstand this, but I find the whole thing very bizarre. The whole way that this has been handled politically, it's just been really badly handled.
Oh, look, on that part, you and I agree. Where I disagree with your assessment, which I very rarely do, you laugh, but I'm serious.
Well, I'm laughing at Doug's comment that it's all Harper's fault.
Oh, yeah, that too, yeah. Of course it's Harper's fault. Everything's... Heck, the burning of the Library of Alexandria was Harper's fault. He held the matchbox, so somebody hit the match. Anyway, where I disagree with you is that the decision that was made about the deferred prosecutionatory agreement, or whatever the DPR stands for, was already taken. She'd already made it clear she was not going to allow SNC to be able to escape, if I can put it that way, into this nebulous cloud where there's no responsibility, just a big fine. She told the Prime Minister in no uncertain terms, no, I'm not signing off on that. They do not qualify for this arrangement, and I'm not going to change my mind. Okay, so it was after that the pressure came. And I'm getting back into legalistic, but I want to get into the thing. The point is, this is to me the crux of the matter. It came after. They weren't trying to say, they probably actually did go to her and say, look, we'd really like it if, and she said, no, I'm not going to. Well, if you don't, there could be consequences. Okay, so that's where to me, the unethical, at least immoral, at least seedy side of this took place. Whether it's legal or not, look, there's lots of things that are legal I totally disagree with. And there's some things that are illegal. So whether something is legal or not doesn't make it right. Okay, we've been down that road through history millions of times. But from a political damage point of view, will they survive this? I am not nearly as convinced as you are that they are going to survive this, because first, now I understand that a week in politics is a lifetime. I get that. But sometimes stories tend to build up one on top of the other. This isn't the first time that they've been caught in a scandal. You've got the Vice Admiral Norman case, which bears a lot of the same hallmarks as this one does, meddling in the legal system for the benefit of the government. Okay, that we haven't even gotten into yet. That's still out there, and people are beginning to wake up to that. You've got the Pakistani, the China, the India and the China mess that are going on right now. I mean, one thing after another, and sooner or later, your boat is so full it sinks itself. The old saying goes, governments aren't defeated by anybody but themselves. I think this is a classic case. And if people really understand, because they don't have to understand all the minutiae that you and I went through. All they have to do is say, them rotten buggers arranged it for themselves so they could make sure that SNC continued to get contracts and didn't lose that ability for 10 years. They're protecting their own. And that's the only perception they're going to need. It's already really intense in Alberta. It's starting to have an effect here in Ontario. And even in Quebec, it's having an impact. One of the safest grounds in the country is Quebec. And even in Quebec, they're beginning to say, wait a minute, this is not right. Atlantic Canada, the numbers are down. Everywhere you look. So it's in some cases, it's not nearly as bad, those two being prime examples, as it is in the rest of the country. But it's having an effect. Now, will they survive this in the short term? Maybe. But I think that people have had it with corruption under the Liberal flag, no matter the level of government. Whether you want to look at it from a municipal point of view, and this fiasco here in the nation's capital called LRT, or a second phase LRT, what a disaster that is, and who's running that show, another Liberal. You've got it on the provincial level, we just saw it with Wynne and McGuinty. Now you've got it on the federal level and people are just fed up with it. One of the things I said tonight in my Facebook livecast was that I'm sick and tired of having to swallow another scandal as if it was business as usual. How does this separate us from being a banana republic? This is the kind of stuff they do. Canada is supposed to be a first world democracy where the rule of law matters and applies equally to all of us. And if we can't trust them to pass laws they have to live under just like us, then we can't trust him for anything. And even if he doesn't go down, he bloody well should.
Don't sugarcoat it, Nick. Have an opinion.
That is
we could take it. We could take it. We could take it, Nick.
Oh man, believe me.
Look, I'm not. Don't get me wrong here, guys. You know, I'm not defending the government. I'm not defending the Liberals. I'm not defending Justin Trudeau. I'm just expressing my curiosity. I find the whole thing to be very curious. I don't, you know, somebody in the chat room was saying, did I even hear the testimony? I heard some of the testimony. It's pretty, she's expressing her opinion, you know, pretty clearly that she felt that this particular case was not appropriate for a deferred prosecution. I get that. But it's her opinion. And I'm not saying she's wrong. I'm just saying it's her opinion. And other people in the government felt that there was a different opinion. This is a defensible thing without the cover-up. It's the cover-up that I'm really curious about. I don't understand why try to cover it up. I mean,
the whole thing began to unravel for me, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to walk on you, but the whole thing began to unravel for me on two different occasions. Unravel as if I ever believed him in the first place. Number one, when Gerald Butts resigned. I didn't do anything wrong, therefore I'm resigning.
Yeah, that I have to admit was one of the oddities too. That was
because if you didn't do anything wrong, why are you resigning?
Yeah, I didn't understand that, and I still don't because. Well, go on, Nick.
Anyway, the point was, if you don't do anything wrong, you don't resign. But he said at the time, I don't want to be a distraction to the Prime Minister. He was the only one talking about distraction. Nobody, not in the press, nobody had mentioned Gerald Butts in a way that would distract from the Prime Minister. It was all about the Prime Minister. It was not about Gerald Butts. So for him to come out and say that was just like, what? Where did that come from? Then Jody Raybould went back into caucus. She spoke to her caucus members.
Well, she was never
into the minister's
cabinet.
In a cabinet, and she spoke in there. Then she sat in caucus. She sat in caucus and then appeared on the benches of the Liberal government.
But that's meaningless. It's first of all, she was always a member of caucus, so there was no problem.
Yeah, I know that.
And whether she's sitting on the front benches or not, here's a question that I don't know. Maybe she answered this. I don't know if somebody asked this during testimony today. But I don't understand why, if she felt that she was being pressured the way she was being pressured, she didn't resign.
Well, I guess that's where I was going.
I don't understand why she didn't resign. She took another cabinet post. She was shuffled out of Attorney General.
Yes, and she didn't speak to that today.
Okay, so what did she say to that?
She said when she took the Veterans Affairs post, she believed her prime minister. And I forget what he said to her, because there was a lot of testimony to digest, and I'm still letting it trickle through my mind. But bottom line was, she trusted him.
Okay.
So she took the cabinet post.
Okay.
But when she, the straw that broke the camel's back was when she realized he was untrustworthy. Like,
I'm trying to understand that.
It's hard to phrase because I'm trying to use her words, not mine. But it got to a point where they said to her under oath, do you trust the prime minister? And she didn't say yes.
Okay, that's but if she was being pressured to do something she felt that she was not supposed to do, she didn't resign. She gets shuffled out of that portfolio and put into another position, Veterans Affairs.
Yep.
And then a short while after, she resigns from Veterans Affairs.
Right. That's why. It was because she'd lost faith in the prime minister.
Why?
This is what I'm trying to remember. I'll have to look at the testimony again, and there's a gap here, and I can't explain it.
Okay, that's fair, because I just find that itself to be so bizarre.
This whole story is bizarre. I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, she would have said, I can't do this. I am not doing this. And if you force me to do this, I will resign, and I will go sit as an independent. And I will not be held back. I will simply come out and tell the world what you just did. That is, to me, what you do in a perfect world. Now, we don't live in a perfect world, obviously. But that is the high moral road. Is it easy to walk? Absolutely not. Because when you walk the high ground, you tend to get shot at a lot. So you make yourself quite the target. But if you want to go down in history as someone with moral courage rather than cowardice, you go ahead and take the shots. You go ahead and do the right thing. If you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, then you do. And that's not the route she chose. Although I do have a lot of respect for her, sitting there taking those questions and answering them as bluntly and as straightforwardly as she could.
Yeah, give credit where it's due.
That's exactly my point.
I don't disagree with you on that, Nick. I think from the little I saw of her testimony, it's funny because I'm juggling 3 or 4 files at once, and as I'm doing them, I purposely did not put on her testimony because I did not want to be distracted. But my text is going, I'm getting beeped every 5 seconds from somebody else.
Did you see this?
Did you see this? Did you hear this? What do you think of that? And I'm going, guys, really, I don't want to. So, maybe I'm coming a little unprepared, but, maybe also because I'm asking these questions again, out of naivete because, it just, the whole thing again, it's just, to me, it's just so bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
Well, Andrew Scheer is now calling for the Prime Minister to step down.
Well, good luck with that.
I know. I'm just saying that it's gotten to that point because that's not a call you make lightly if you're the leader of the opposition. It looks if you don't do it in the most if you're not doing it in the most serious of cases, it looks opportunistic. And because after a little while, the little boy that cried wolf gets ignored, right?
Right. And we wouldn't want, why would we want to look opportunistic if we're the opposition?
Well, we're a few minutes over, so we should take a break. And when we come back, we've got plenty more waiting for all of you right here on the Combat Zone. I'm Nick. He's Joseph. Stay right there. We'll be back with more right after this.
Okay, I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are back in the combat zone with Joe and Nick and Joe. Hey, and Nick, I gotta tell you, your hair is standing straight up. Good thing we are not, okay, now you've brushed it down. It's a good thing that we're not on video, although, you know, someday we might be on video if we ever get our audio worked out. Now, by the way, you guys might be hearing, if you're listening to this live, which obviously you are, you might be hearing a bit of buzz in the background. There's a small defect that we found in our soundboard, and it took a little while to isolate it, but we just didn't have enough time to correct the problem tonight. So bear with us. I hope it's not too distracting. If you're listening to this, as a podcast, you probably don't hear the buzz because, our technical people have simply removed it, because we do have the technology to do that. Have we flogged SNC-Lavelin to death, Dick?
Yes, I think so. I think we have milked that cow dry.
Milked the cow dry?
Yes, we have milked the cow dry. We have turned...
That sounds like a song, right? Milk the cow dry, milk the cow dry.
If we worked at it long enough.
I don't know. We need more alcohol.
If we had enough alcohol, we could make a song out of anything.
If we had enough alcohol, we'd be out there milking the cow dry.
Yeah. Let's change gears completely. There's plenty of other things. I want to go to Montreal. And the reason I want to go to Montreal... I love Montreal.
Montreal's a beautiful city.
It is. It is.
It really is. If you haven't been to Montreal, make a trip to Montreal at least once. It is. It's a wonderful city. You know, it's another great city. Quebec. Quebec City is a beautiful, beautiful city.
They still have cannonballs in the walls of some of the old parts of the city from the siege of Quebec leading up to the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. They have the balls cemented into the
That
wall.
Doesn't surprise me.
No.
But it is. It's a beautiful, especially in the wintertime.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't mind being out in the cold and that, which Quebec City is a very pretty city. And Montreal's a very nice city as well. I like... You know, I know all those people in Toronto are going to say, "Oh, you know, you're anti-Toronto and that." But the truth is, Montreal is a nicer city than Toronto. Toronto has its own character, which makes it, you know, good in its own way. But I just think that Montreal is a prettier city.
There is one thing that Toronto has that Montreal doesn't.
Yeah, unfortunately.
No. It's very good.
Yes, I know.
It's the Toronto Maple Leafs who are beating Edmonton 6-2 with $1.30.
See, I knew that was gonna. I knew you were going to say that
was coming. But Quebec itself.
When does the collapse start? That's what I want to know.
Well, there's only 20 games left. Even if they did collapse now, they'd still make the playoffs. Anyway, let's put hockey aside. But as far as
Montreal. Back to what we're
okay. There's
not
a story in the
do.
National Post dated sometime before now. Where do they hide the date? I hate that. Let's see. Is it that old?
Oh, here we go.
November 24th, 2011. Children play in the playground school.
2011?
February 24th, 2019. So it's an update.
Yeah, I was going to go, that's not, because I saw this story. I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, so to let the listener know who has not seen this yet, I think this is an idea that never should have gone the way of the dodo bird, and I'm glad to see some common sense around it. So let me share just a couple of paragraphs to give people a sense of what we're talking about. While pushing and shoving is often frowned upon in the schoolyard, some Quebec elementary schools are experimenting with the idea of letting their students play rough. At least 2 schools have announced pilot projects to set up supervised rough play zones in the schoolyard, where students can shove, grab, and wrestle in the snow to their heart's content. Contrevents Elementary School in St. Anne. I'm going to blow this name out of the water, and I don't mean to do it. I just can't read or speak French. Looks like Apollo with a millionaire stashed on the end of it. St. Apollinaire, Quebec, is one of the schools experimenting with the idea. On snowy days, a play fighting zone is outlined by cones and is subject to strict rules, according to Principal Shirley Bernier. Participation has to be voluntary. Kicking, hitting, biting, or throwing objects is forbidden, but kids are allowed to grab each other's coats, make their opponents fall, as well as to pile up and grab each other, to roll on the ground together, Bernier said in a phone interview. Okay, so in other words, she's letting the kids be kids. And I think it's brilliant. It's like, look, there was a story we covered a couple, maybe very early on in the combat zone history about a school in New Zealand who had left construction materials in the yard. And the kids were going out in this elementary school and taking them, and this is like scaffolding and sawhorses and stuff, and they were building forts out of it and climbing on it. And I don't know whether the tree was part of it, but there was another story about a young man who had climbed a tree, had fallen out, broken his arm, and the mother brought the child in to see the principal, and the principal thought, oh, great, I'm going to get it now. And the mother went in and said, I'm just here to support you. I do not want that tree cut down. This is part of growing up. And I think people are realizing that you cannot wrap kids in bubble wrap and expect them to turn into functioning, normal, well-adjusted adults if they've never experienced pain or loss or, the kind of rough and tumble that life growing up is. And this is the same kind of thing. It's a school project, but I really hope this succeeds and even takes off, that common sense returns. Because she makes it clear, well, look, we're not into violence. We're not into, people throwing rocks at each other or fist fighting or things like that. But if they want to wrestle, if they want to, play king of the castle, if they want to do that kind of stuff, knock yourself out. Go be kids.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the terrible things that's happened in terms of childhood development has been the elimination of roughhousing during recess times. And I think that, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not playing amateur psychologist here. But I do think that there is something to be said for allowing kids to just burn off their excess energy. It's good for fitness. It's good for attention in the classroom, I would expect. It's good all around. And, when kids are shoving and pushing and they're playing in an unstructured, unsupervised way, they find ways to interact with one another, to sort out their conflicts, their issues. And, every now and then things might get a little heated, and maybe that's when an adult steps in. It wouldn't be the first time, but I lament the elimination of, and it's not just roughhousing. I mean, they've taken away, I don't know if you remember monkey bars in schools. Yep. Okay. And why would they do this? I mean, this isn't even roughhousing. These are just structures that you used to climb on. And because, one or two students fell and broke an arm or whatever, in the whole country every year. Now, I know why the schools took these things away.
Insurance.
And it was predominantly because of they were insurance liabilities.
That's right.
The school boards didn't want to have to pay for the insurance, or the insurance company certainly was just simply saying, we're not going to cover you. We're not going to provide you with liability insurance unless you remove these dangerous, quote unquote, structures. So I think it's been terrible, but I segue a teensy bit, bear with me here, Nick. I think it's equally terrible, if not more, that you start off taking away this physical relief valve. Okay. You put the kids into a classroom, and now you bombard them with tales of how the earth is going to end, by, 2022 or whatever, that kooky congresswoman in the United States was alleging.
Oh, Lord.
To me, putting that kind of thing before children who don't have, I think, the emotional capacity to be able to process what's being said, I think that's akin to child abuse. I think it's not just akin. I think it's straight out child abuse. We wonder why children are depressed today in school. We wonder about, teenage suicide, etc. Although, in fairness, the teenage suicide rates have been down for a number of years. So all of this talk about, bullying and safe spaces and gay straight alliances and stuff like that actually doesn't have. There's no scientific, there's no statistical justification for doing any of those things. I don't care whether you agree with them or not. I'm just saying the notion that you have to provide these safe spaces for teenagers and for kids because they're being bullied and there's an epidemic of suicides because of this, it's an invention. It's not really happening. But if you're concerned about that, okay, and I know this is off the topic a little bit, this isn't where we were getting into, but it's kind of related, you can see. If you're concerned about bullying, if you're concerned about safe spaces, why would, in heaven's name, would you go to the children and say to them, we must stop global warming, we must stop climate change? Even if it was true, to talk to a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old about this and to lay in front of them your belief that the earth is on the verge of an irreparable damage that's going to ultimately result in the foreseeable future in the extinction of all animal life, including human life. How do you put that in front of the children and expect that you're not going to inflict some kind of psychological, emotional damage with them? Even if it's true, let the children be children. Let them have their innocence, okay? Let them learn how to read and write and all of that stuff, and stop putting all of this alarmist, catastrophic predictions in front of them.
Well, I think there's
Have I gone way off board here?
Because I think what happens is this is like a wheelbarrow. Childhood's like a wheelbarrow. And that as you go along, as you grow as a child and become more adult-like, people put bigger rocks in your wheelbarrow, and you have to carry it along. And sooner or later, the wheelbarrow becomes too full for you to manage, and there has to be some mechanism in order for you to dump that wheelbarrow and start over again with an empty one so that you can carry on with life. There's all kinds of examples of that, but the bottom line is, if the rock you drop in is the end of the world as we know it, there's not much room for much else. In other words, what I'm trying to say is these kinds of things handed on to laid on the back of children too early are cumulative, and they don't have the ability to deal with it. You could make the same argument about transgenderism. You could make the same argument about a dozen different topics. Why are you going there? Sex ed. Why are you going there with a 9-year-old? At 9, what can they do? Are they in a position to be able to change the world? Now, every year you see a few of them being manipulated, usually by the left, saying, save our planet. Remember that song, what was it about? Don't kill all the trees, don't kill all the flowers, leave us pure waters and forests untouched. Think of tomorrow, leave something for us. I can hear it in my head. I'm not going to bother singing it. But the most effective,
the most effective environmental alarmist ads have been impromptu YouTube videos done by children who have no idea whatsoever what they're talking about. Witness the campaign against straws. And again, I was talking to somebody just the other day. In fact, I think you were with me, Nick, where we were sitting and having a glass of water, actually. And I said, can I have a straw? And she pulls out a straw, and right from her, she keeps the straws with her for the people that are going to ask, right?
Pocket, yeah.
And I mentioned, I said, straws where we live do not make it to the ocean. They go into landfill. And what her reaction was, she was incredulous.
Yeah.
It was not she was going, oh, I didn't know that. In fact, it was really bizarre because she didn't say, oh, I didn't know that. She was sort of saying, really? Are you sure? Are you really? Like it was like she only half believed
We spent a moment or two giving her a little bit to chew on.
Well, you were giving her a little bit of
okay,
attitude
fine.
there.
And I did point out the fact that it's not our fault that a tortoise doesn't know that you use up a rolled American dollar bill to snort coke with, not a plastic straw.
Yes, that.
So why should
that
we?
didn't help. That didn't help our.
It made her laugh.
Well, I know, but
anyway, but to get back on topic here. The situation is cumulative, because within the world is going to end. There's all kinds of little rocks to go with it. The oceans are full of plastic. There's a hole in the ozone layer. They're killing Bambi. We can't have meat because it's hard on the planet. There's a whole culture that's built on a lie. And this lie is being fed to them. And I think inherently kids reach a certain point where they either accept it as true despite the evidence, or subconsciously realize it's not true. And that's part of where their angst comes from. It's part of where their emotional problems come from, because they don't know how to deal with this. And it's not surprising. Now, I'm trying not to play the child psychologist either. I'm just a guy with 8 kids. And after a little while, you learn a thing or two about the way kids think. But when you look at it and say, all right, if the kids didn't have to worry, or weren't forced to worry about this stuff, maybe they could spend more time figuring out how to read and write and add and subtract, rather than whether Bambi's going to be okay and how do you recycle a can.
And of course, the upshot of that is that if our kids were learning how to read and write and do science properly, and think critically, then the chance that they're going to come up with real viable solutions to the alleged problems is that much greater. So it's, you're getting them, you're really hitting them both from both directions the way we're doing it now. On the one hand, we're presenting them with problems that are allegedly on the verge of being insurmountable, at the same time that we're denying them the opportunity to develop the skills and the capacity to be able to survive, not just to survive, but to be able to solve those problems. So, and again, whether they're a real problem or not is beside the point. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's, I don't know. And then, I don't know. I don't know, Nick. Sometimes it becomes so frustrating that you think, what is the point of all of this? Why are we doing this, Nick? Why are we doing this show, Nick?
Because somebody's got to do it. It's like a letter I once read on the air when I was still on terrestrial radio about a young fella going to Afghanistan, and his niece wrote him and said, you're 20, you're 21. Why are you going off into a foreign country to fight? And he responded with that line, somebody has to do it. And, at the time...
okay, but let's not compare ourselves off to...
No, I'm just saying that's where I got the line in my head was from that letter.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting we're the same as veterans fighting for their country on a battlefield, not in the same way that soldiers do. I think there is a fight, a philosophical fight that you and I can engage in. And I think that's a worthy goal. I think it's something that has to be done. But I understand, too, that sometimes it feels like you're the only one trying to put the forest fire out with a very small garden hose. And, you're being encircled. So I understand that feeling, too. But I guess to get back to this whole kids being kids thing, one of the reasons why I love living in the country is because when I tell my kids to go play in traffic, they have to go looking for it. They would have to go and stand by the road for an hour and wait for a car to go by. In other words, they live in a relatively carefree environment. They can run around in their bare feet. They can come in muddy. We take the garden hose. We hose them down. And now
outside though, you hose them down outside.
Yes, we don't do that in the house. No,
right.
No. And they squeal like crazy when you hit them with the cold water, and that's half the fun of being a parent. But now my grandkids are just getting old enough to go through that now. And the joy on their faces when they're outside and they're experiencing nature and they're just being kids, watching my children use plastic swords and have a sword fight, whacking away at each other. And they're just having a ball till one of them gets cracked across the shin. And then, usually then you got to go out and separate them because then he gets angry. But they have the freedom to be able to go out and do whatever they want to, climb a tree. Here's a picture I have of my 14-year-old when she was about 8. We transplanted a maple in my backyard about 10 or 15 years ago. And it's probably about 6 inches around. So you can't, not just anybody can climb this, but Mackie was a little waif when she did it. And she climbed up into the tree, and all you can see in the picture is this foot standing on a branch. And she's up in the tree. So rather than scold her for climbing the tree, we took a picture of it. Let her be herself. Let her do what she wants. As long as she's not hurting anybody, and the risk isn't too great, like she's not going to, drive a car down the driveway at 10 years old. You got to be smart, but at the same time, let them be children.
We used to, in the wintertime, we used to climb up on the garage roof, and we'd shovel snow down until we got the level of the snow was the level of the roof. and so we built this ski hill from the peak of the roof of the garage down into the backyard. So it was fun.
I remember now I know it didn't happen.
That was,
here.
by the way, before the garage burned down.
Yeah, I wonder who did that. It surprises me every time I think about it, the fact I actually lived. In 1977, I was in the hospital with a broken arm, and I was out. I got bucked off a pony, and my arm went back. I broke it in 3 places. So I'm in the hospital, and for 3 days, nobody comes to visit me. In those days, they kept you in the hospital. And all I can see is snow swirling outside my window.
How old were you?
14.
Okay.
So I'm standing there going, where is everybody? And I never thought to ask a nurse, and it was always the same nurse. And they never, because when you're 14, you don't pay attention to this kind of stuff. And after 3 days, somebody walked in. I said, where have you guys been? Did you forget me? He said, did you not know that we just had one of the worst blizzards in Southern Ontario history? My dad was in the school bus, lost with 42 kids in it, along with 4 GPS and cell phones, and they had skidoos out all over Essex County looking for him, trying to find the bus and the kids. So how we survived those days, I have no idea, but just the stuff we used to do when that blizzard was over, the reason I mention it is because we had a situation, the same thing. The peak of the barn was 20 feet. The snow pile on the end of the barn was 18.
Right.
And we just take the toboggan, throw it off the roof, and down the barn we go. Down the snow we go. We had a blast.
Right. And before, and of course, if before the hill had enough snow to actually reach the edge of the roof.
Right.
Okay. It didn't. Which was just ideal for a ski jump.
Oh, man.
It's hard to believe we survived, right?
It is. I think at the times I stole my dad's car.
Okay, I never did that.
Oh, yeah, on a number of occasions. I hit a pheasant with one of them, and that made a big mess. Feathers everywhere. Oh, I could sit here and tell you for hours about some of the stuff. It's a miracle. See, this is why I know there's a God, because it's the only way I got out of my teen years. Just incredible. Some of the stupid stuff I did. Time to take a break, I think, Joseph.
We're getting on towards it, Nick.
Yep.
Okay, so we will be back in a couple of minutes right here on the Combat Zone with Nick and Joe.
right, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. He's Joe, I'm Nick, and we have been talking, first half hour we talked about SNC-Lavelin. Imagine that, and that was quite an interesting conversation. It's been, both of us are very passionate about it. Then we switched gears completely, and we're talking about letting kids be kids on the playground. There's a story out of Quebec where they're experimenting with this idea of letting kids roughhouse on the schoolyard. Not fist fighting or throwing rocks or anything like that, but, throwing each other around, playing King of the Hill, that kind of stuff. Now, I want to go from there, Joseph. Let's talk about the Burnaby, BC by-election.
Okay, but before we do that, Nick.
Oh, geez, yes.
Nick's getting senile.
I'm losing it, man.
Because just before I cued him to do the re-intro, he says, "Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is we got to talk about the donate button on the website." And because we didn't talk about it earlier, and I go, "Okay, no problem." Then I cue him, and it's completely gone from his mind. Like 10 seconds, not even 10 seconds.
I've got the memory of a goldfish.
I don't know how much memory a goldfish has.
About 10 seconds.
Anyway, yeah. So listen, guys. Some websites, some shows, they have pay gateways. You pay, $10 a month or whatever, just to have the privilege of listening in to the show. But we are trying to keep it free for whoever wants to listen and download podcasts later on. Having said that, we do pay we do have to pay for certain services, high-speed internet. We do have technical issues we have to deal with. We have equipment, etc. So our appeal is this, okay? If you like what you hear, if you support what we're doing, feel free to click on the donate button on our website and leave us a couple of dollars. It'll help pay for the equipment and the maintenance, and then maybe we won't have that background buzz, and who knows, maybe we might actually have that phone system fixed next week.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, it's actually, the phone system isn't working. It's all my fault. I take total responsibility. It was I was trying to fix the buzz, and while I was isolating it, I got a little off with some of my configurations, etc., and we just didn't have the time to get the phone up and operating, and so it's all my fault. Blame me. Blame Canada.
Blame Harper.
Blame Harper. Blame Harper. Hey, speaking of which, what's going on with you guys in the chat room there? Okay, I see there's a little more activity all of a sudden. It's like the minute we stop talking about the SNC, it's like, okay, we're not interested anymore. Okay, we don't care about those kids throwing snowballs. We just want to attack Justin Trudeau.
Well, there's plenty of appetite for that, that's for sure. And in a way, we're going back to that.
Of course, and I just look at, as I'm saying this, I look at Mark's comment. Right?
Yeah, I know.
Right? And of course, he just wants to get right back into that, right?
Yeah. Oh, man.
I think Junior's sweating a little bit too. And fair, it absolutely, I just don't understand what was going through their minds when they figured that they had to cover all this stuff up. Yeah, for sure he's sweating, but it's, Nick, I'm just going to, not to reopen this can of worms, but long time before an election. So,
well, it leaves a mighty big lump in the carpet.
It is. This is a big one, but, governments have scandals, and doesn't necessarily mean that they fall. And of course they have a majority, so they're not going to get kicked out of office here. They're going to be able to go all the way to October at a minimum. And as I think I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned on air or off air, but they're constitutionally, they can go right until sometime in the fall of 2020 before they have to call an election.
You did mention that on air.
So I wouldn't hold my breath. This government is not on the verge of being kicked out of office. They might be kicked out of office eventually. Maybe this sticks and they don't recover from it. But, a week is a long time in politics, and 8 months is an even longer time.
Okay, well, speaking of that, this is another issue that can affect them in the long run. And it's the Burnaby South election results that saw Jagmeet Singh, leader of the federal NDP, finally win a seat. Now, I find this interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'll give you the breakdown, just starting from top to bottom in no particular order. Member of he was an independent. Terry Grimwald got 242 votes, or 1.1%. The Liberal, Richard T. Lee, got 5,919 votes, or 26%. The Conservative, Jay Shin, got 5,147 votes, or 22.6%. Jagmeet Singh for the NDP got 8,848, or 38.9% of the vote. But note this, Laura Lynn Thompson of the People's Party got 2,422 votes, or 10.6%. And then bringing up the rear is another independent, Valentine Wu, 168 votes at 0.7. So you can take the two independents, throw them out. But let's look at what would have happened if the Conservatives and the People's Party had not been, in other words, if there had been just a Conservative running. If the People's Party, and I'm not saying the People's Party is a wrong party, but let's say those two candidates represented one. Okay, you add those two numbers together, 10.6 and 22.6, you would have beaten the Liberal. You would have had 32.6% of the vote, and you'd have scared the crap out of Jagmeet Singh. That, I think, is telling.
Okay. It was never going to happen.
I wasn't expecting him to win.
No, the level of animosity between Conservative supporters, that is Conservative Party supporters, and People's Party supporters in Burnaby South was intense. So they were two different groups, and there's no way they would have come together combined. It just was not going to happen. But
this goes back, though. Here's where I'm thinking, and tell me that I'm wrong if I am, please. If they had found a place for Max within the Conservative Party, there would be no People's Party. And Mr. what's his name now? Jay Shin would have collected the votes that went to the People's Party. And he would have come in second.
Yeah, it would not have happened.
So even under that scenario, where would those people have gone who support Max Bernier? Who would they have voted for?
They would have stayed home.
They wouldn't vote for anybody.
They would not have voted for, well, not all of them would have stayed home, but a good chunk of them would have stayed home. There were other issues that were affecting the voter distribution and voter turnout in Burnaby South that had nothing really to do with Maxime. Although as a general comment, I will say this: I do agree with you that if I were Maxime Bernier, if I were advising Maxime Bernier, I would have strongly advised him not to leave the party. I would have strongly advised him to continue to fight for what he believes in within the party, because ultimately, in our system of government, for better or for worse, you advance your cause within a political party. And, without that kind of structure and that kind of collegial support, then, you're just not going to get anywhere. And in defense of political parties, because I know lots of people don't like political parties, but it sort of reminds me of Winston Churchill's saying that democracy is absolutely the worst form of government except for all of the others.
Right.
Well, political parties sort of fall into that general category or attitude. I understand all of the downside of political parties, and I'm sympathetic to the complaints, But political parties were not an invention of politicians. They were something that evolved over a period of time, because without them, Parliament, and remember, Parliament pre-exists political parties literally by hundreds of years, but Parliament was, frankly, it was dysfunctional, and nothing ever got done. And maybe that was not such a bad thing, because that was back in the days, of course, when they didn't have to do a lot of things, okay? But as Parliament and as governments became more involved in people's lives and providing services and regulation, etc., not all of which has been bad, okay, let's be fair. There were times that, that it was necessary to advance a certain issue, and you couldn't get any traction on things with everybody being an independent. And so political parties really sort of evolved from that. It was a way of imposing some degree of order over chaos. And what you have to understand is that if you have a cause, if you have an issue you want to advance, whether you're advancing them within a political party or you're simply advancing them as a quote unquote independent, very rarely do independents get far in advancing anything in Parliament, but whether you're doing it in a political party or you're doing it in Parliament, it's still the same thing. You're still having to build coalitions. You're still having to convince people, etc. And, when you look at what happens in the House of Commons, Nick, and that people go, well, you're only voting along the lines of your political party. And that's largely true. But, what happens in the caucus is really very democratic as well. I guess where I'm going here with this is, I don't even know how we got onto this topic of political parties and that, but I'm becoming as senile as you are. Except that I was able to keep going, as if I knew what I was talking about, which I actually do. But anyway, look, the point is this: Maxime Bernier should have stayed within the Conservative Party and advanced his ideas within the Conservative Party. He would not have convinced everybody, but I think that on some issues, some of the ideas that he has traction within the Conservative Party. And even if you don't convince everybody, you can convince enough members of your party, of your caucus, to support you on some of these issues. And then when it comes to the House of Commons, you have this coalition. People are supporting you, even some of the people who don't necessarily agree with what you want, because there's a certain amount of horse trading that goes on too. And these are not bad things.
Well, I always thought that political parties arose in order to stop sword fighting.
Well, no, it wouldn't have been sword fighting. It would have been outright brawling.
Or either that or a pistol duel at dawn.
Yeah, look.
Because there were days when they used to carry swords into Parliament.
Well, sure, absolutely. And, we're making fun and making a joke, but you're not entirely wrong, about, fighting and conflict in the House of Commons. But political parties really came about because there had to be some, imposition of some degree of discipline and structure simply to get things done.
See, I think that's all fine. I'm not going to argue with any of that from the legalistic inside politics point of view.
Yeah, now just let me stop and I want to make it clear. This is not a technical thing. It's not legalistic. This was purely practical.
Okay, but today, all right, and I'm not saying we change our system. For all its warts and wrinkles, it's still the best one out there. But what I'm saying is that the Canadian population doesn't know anything about what you just talked about. And they're the ones who cast the ballot. So when they see Maxime Bernier take what they consider to be the high road, start their own party, and he's speaking their language, it's going to have an impact on people like Andrew Scheer. And that's what I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
About this thing. Because I know he's not going to be the next prime minister.
Well, who? Max Bernier?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, he doesn't have the infrastructure. There's so many things he just doesn't have. He's got charisma. He has an amazing ability to raise money, but it takes more than those two things. As you've told me 1,000 times, money doesn't win elections. Speeches on the stump don't win elections. Infrastructure wins elections. Having people on the ground, having your team in place, being organized, fundraising, all these things working together. It's a well-oiled machine to get elected.
Agreed.
So, but the average Canadian who goes out, pays 2 weeks worth of attention to the election race, whatever one you want to pick, and bases their votes in a lot of cases on what are you going to do for me, or on outrage about what the government, to their mind, has done or not done. They don't know anything about the inside politics we just talked about. And when Maxime Bernier walks out and takes what they appear to be a principled stand, they're going to flock to him.
Okay, well, that's now, let's analyze that for a second, okay? So we've looked at Burnaby South.
Right.
If people were going to flock to Maxime Bernier, then why didn't they flock to his party in York Simcoe, where they got 1.7% of the vote or something like that, or or in Outremont, where they got even less?
Well, for first of all, Simcoe, tell me I'm wrong, is either a very strong conservative or a liberal riding, so he's not going to make much headway there. And in Outremont, come on, that's liberal territory. They're not going to win there either. But
well, it was
look
NDP.
At where they did go to him in numbers, and that's in Burnaby South.
They didn't. Okay, so but the reason I'm pointing this out, Nick, is because they didn't go to Maxime Bernier, and there's a reason I'm okay. So follow my logic now, okay? Right. The lesson to learn here is that if you have a strong local candidate, as the People's Party had in Burnaby South in Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson.
Yes.
So she was a strong candidate.
Yeah, she was.
Pardon me, that was an off-camera cough, off-microphone cough. So she was a strong candidate. But she also ran, so there were three things: a strong candidate, a candidate who was willing to run on issues that resonated with voters in her riding. Okay. And what were those issues? Those issues were, she's pro-life. Okay. She's pro-traditional marriage.
Yeah.
She's for strong, strict enforcement of immigration laws.
Right.
Okay. Those were basically the main things. Okay. So she had a constituency that she was able to mobilize in that riding. So what I'm saying here is that the People's Party and Maxime Bernier were almost coincidental to that. And it is true that she would have done a lot worse if she'd run as an independent. So she did have some infrastructure, and she did have some party support, and Maxime Bernier did campaign for her there, so there was an added benefit. But the backbone, the strength of her campaign in Burnaby South was her willingness to stand up for what she believed in and to mobilize voters on the issues that were important to her. Okay. Now, take the candidate in York Simcoe, Robert Gertz, I think his name was. Okay. Quality candidate but a quality candidate who in Hebrew, we have a term, okay, when we talk about kosher food, there are three categories of food. There's meat food, which would include poultry. Okay. There's milk, dairy-based food. Okay. And then there's neither meat nor dairy. That's completely neutral. Okay. Doesn't fit into either category.
And so on.
There's the Hebrew term we use for those foods that are in the middle is parev.
Parev?
Parev. Parev, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. The candidate, Robert Gertz, is a Parev candidate. He didn't stand for anything except that he was the People's Party candidate. So was he pro-life or not pro-life? Was he pro-traditional marriage or not pro-traditional marriage? Was he pro-dairy farmer or not pro-dairy farmer? In other words, he didn't have issues that he was willing to run on that were focused on what really people passionately cared about. And it could be that there was nobody that cared about those issues in York Simcoe. Okay. But the same thing with James Seal in Outremont. Okay. You have to have issues that you're going to run on. And this is going to be a very big problem for Max Bernier going forward. Okay. Because Laura Lynn Thompson in Burnaby South ran as an anti-abortion candidate, and that resonated with a large segment of the population there. Okay. There's a very strong conservative Christian Chinese community in Burnaby South, and that's where a lot of her support came from. Okay. Does that mean that the People's Party is pro-life? The answer is they don't want to take a position on it. So and that's going to be a problem for them moving forward.
Okay, so what you've got, if I distill this correctly, is in one case you have someone with principles and a backbone to go with it, representing the People's Party. And in two other cases, you have people counting on Max's sex appeal to get them elected without having to take a stand on anything.
Yeah, well, that might be a little more harsh than I'm trying to express it.
Okay, but I'm just trying to put this in simple terms.
The bottom line is that the problem that Maxime Bernier is going to have with the People's Party, and I know Maxime Bernier, okay? I have a lot of respect and admiration for him. He's a terrific guy. He's intelligent. He's passionate. He really cares, and he really believes in what he believes in. The problem is that some of the things that he believes in, one of the things that he believes in is a political party that has at its core principle not having a core principle. There's a disconnect there. It's a paradox, okay? In other words, you can't just say, I'm going to have a political party and I'm just going to let everybody who joins the political party decide what things are going to be, okay? That sounds really nice until you start to realize that what you're really saying is my party doesn't have any positions on any particular thing, and we'll sort those positions out because it's open to everybody. That's a little bit of a fiction. We like to talk about, Big Ten Conservative Party and Big Ten Liberal Party and all of this stuff. But the reality is that there have to be unifying principles. And the unifying principle of the People's Party is that we don't have a unifying principle.
So what you've got is a cart and a horse with no driver.
Yeah, in a sense, that's one way to put it. So here you have somebody who's running passionately that's anti-abortion and pro-traditional marriage, okay? But in Ontario, okay, somebody's going to run and they're going to go, but I'm not pro-marriage. I'm not pro-traditional marriage. I'm all in favor of same-sex marriage. And as for abortion, I think it should be perfectly open and legal, and I think that the taxpayers should pay for it. Those are incompatible positions to take. And at some point in time, they're going to clash with one another, and the party has to sort itself out. Do we want to do this or do we not want to do it?
So let me ask you this then. He has this amazing ability to raise money. Like, he's raised more money in a shorter period of time than I think any political party, certainly in recent memory. I won't say history, but
yeah, I don't know. The Conservatives raise a lot of money in short periods of time. So he's raising money, but
he's no slouch at raising money.
True.
A lot of people are cutting him checks. Are you saying that as this nebulous cloud begins to disperse and people realize there's nothing substantive about it, it's just a bunch of people trying to run their own fiefdoms or their own kingdoms under his umbrella, that money is going to tail off?
Again, I think that you're being more harsh than I would be. I don't think it's a question of fiefdoms or anything like that, but it is going to be a dilemma for him. And, we're talking about social policy right now, abortion, marriage, and other things like that. But we could just as easily be talking about economic policy. Should we be interventionist or not interventionist with respect to government subsidies? Now we say, well, I'm against corporate welfare. Well, okay, but what if most of the people who run and get chosen as candidates for your party are in favor of corporate welfare? If you are just completely open to the democratic idea that the majority wins, which is one of the principles of the People's Party, then how do you square that circle? At some point in time, you have to stand for something. And again, I'm being too harsh. I'm not saying that Maxime doesn't stand for things, but I think that at some point in time, sooner rather than later, people are going to realize that, being upset with the Conservative Party allegedly abandoning conservative principles is not enough of a unifying principle around which people can get involved and coalesce.
Let's say over the next 90 days, if you were advising Max now, the fact that the People's Party is a reality, if I were doing it, I would say things to him like, okay, you need to come out, or you have to have a policy convention where you hammer out what it is this party stands for so that people can rally around it. Because it's like a flagstaff with no flag. You've got to fly something, so figure out what that something is so people can cling to it.
Okay, so let's put this on hold and pick the discussion up on the other end of the break. Is that okay?
Oh, are we really that late already?
It's getting there. So, okay, we'll be back in a minute on the Combat Zone with Dick and Joe. Welcome back to the Combat Zone. I'm Nick, he's Joseph, and we are discussing a whole host of things. We are in the home stretch.
We are. But before we go on, we're not going to make the same mistake we made off the top of the show. We have a guest coming up next week. And this whole thing down at Queen's Park about rejigging healthcare is really timely. Right.
Steve Skivington is a guest next week. We'll be on. And he's just written a book on healthcare reform.
Yeah, this is going to hurt or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not going to reveal it just yet, but when we get closer to next week, we'll put some links up. People can download a copy from, I think it's available. I'm not sure if it's available electronically, but you can get a copy from Amazon, but we'll provide you with links, etc. Anyway, we should have a pretty good debate next week about healthcare. So yes. Mark your calendars. Make sure that you join in next week, 9 p.m. Eastern Time in the Combat Zone. Tell your friends about it. We want to have a serious, lively, and meaningful debate about healthcare reform, not just in Ontario, but right across the country.
All right. Well, that said, let's go back to Burnaby for just a second. And we'll put a cap on it because there's a lot of other things we still have to get to tonight if we want to move down the agenda at all. I'll let you kind of summarize what happened out there and what you think the long-term consequences are going to be.
Yeah, I just think that the lesson to learn for the People's Party, and indeed for all of the political parties, are the effectiveness. If you look at Laura Lynn Thompson's campaign, is how effective a candidate can be if they're focusing on issues that are relevant to voters in the riding. Call them hot button issues. So that's number one. And some local organization and a good quality candidate. But the most important thing is you have to have issues that people are going to coalesce around. And let's not forget it was a by-election, so the voter turnout was low. So when we talk about, almost 11% of the vote, well, that's 11% of probably something around 33 or 40% of what normal voter turnout would be. So, you could read more into it than really you ought to. But it's, I think that's really what it comes down to, the bottom line. And the second thing is, if the People's Party is going to go anywhere, they're going to have to find those issues that they have to run on that can unify members of the party. Being upset and angry with Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party is not enough. Even the Reform Party, and I was around in the early days of the Reform Party. I was never a member of the Reform Party. I stayed with the Federal Progressive Conservative Party when the Reform Party formed. I was very sympathetic to Preston Manning and what he was trying to do. But I never felt that he did the right thing by creating a new political party. I thought that he also should stay within the Progressive Conservative Party and fight it out within the party. And he would have won most of the policy debates ultimately. But the difference between what the People's Party is doing, what the Reform Party did in those days, was the Reform Party focused on organization. That was number one. And number two, they really focused on a handful of issues that resonated primarily with conservatives. Balancing the budget, getting the deficit under control at that time was a very big issue. So they focused on that. That was an issue to focus on. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't issues out there for the People's Party to focus on, but Max has got to do more to bring those issues into sharper focus. And he may end up having to take the lead and say, this is we're going to run on this issue and this issue and this issue. If he can't carry members of the party with him, how are you going to carry the country with you?
That is a very good question, and one we won't get the answer to anytime soon. He'll have to answer it between now and October, but I don't think he's going to answer it tomorrow. All right, let's move on to the international stage. Just to kind of look, there's been so much going on within our own borders that once in a while you got to take a breath in somebody else's backyard. Trump is visiting Kim Jong-un in Vietnam. And look, there's a lot of people who absolutely loathe the U.S. president. And there's things about him I don't like either. I mean, he can come off as flippant. He can come off as arrogant. If I ever got a hold of his cell phone, I'd drop it through his shredder. Different things like that I just think he could be doing a much more effective job. But he is doing, at least in some quarters, amazing work. Take the pro-life example. There's all kinds of movement on that front that we never would have thought we'd see, certainly in the next 5 or 10 years. So that's good news. But as far as North Korea is concerned, nobody has moved those goalposts as much as Trump has in his, what's this now, his third meeting with Kim Jong?
I think it's his second meeting.
Second? Okay, let's.
Well, a second summit.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Because at first he started out calling him a rocket man, and I kind of like that, the little grease ball. I thought they were rather appropriate because I don't like people who blow their opposition apart with anti-aircraft guns. Just not my kind of guy. But anyway, he has stabilized the Korean Peninsula in a way nobody else has done in 50 years. You name the president, and I'm including Reagan in this. Now, granted, in those days, it wasn't a high priority. They had far more important fish to fry with the Soviet Union. But still, Korea, the two Koreas being ready to go to war at a drop of a hat, has always been a major security issue for the world. And now that they have the bomb, it's even more so. So for him, I think this is a massive coup that you're going to see, or a massive feather in his hat you're going to see downplayed in the States. They're going to make fun of it, and I'm talking about the mainstream media, because that's what they do with Trump. And yet, at the same time, we're beginning to see cracks in the wall. There's now, if to the best of my knowledge, you have daily visits, or they're allowing family reunification between North and South Korea for the first time since hostilities broke out back in 1950. You're seeing rail lines being laid between the two countries, a softening of the demilitarized zone. All these things have taken place on his watch, and I don't think he gets the credit for it he deserves.
Yeah, not just on the international stage, not just in Korea, but you mentioned that there are other things that he's been doing domestically that are happening largely under the radar, but I think that have been very effective. And judicial appointments have been very important. I don't have a dog in that hunt. Obviously, being in Canada, I don't have as much concern about the American judicial system, except to say that, quite often, if you follow the idea, if you subscribe to the idea of contagion, sometimes what ends up happening is that certain judicial and social trends that are occurring in the United States end up coming up here, and I don't necessarily like that. And the opposite happens as well. It goes in the other direction. So I do think that in the long run, it's good that the president has been as effective as he has been, probably more effective in this area than perhaps any other area of policy, and that is in the area of judicial appointments. We're not talking here Supreme Court appointments, although it's entirely possible that he could have yet another Supreme Court appointment before his presidency is done. On the international stage, interesting, he has his style. I think it's interesting what has happened on the Korean Peninsula. I think that generally it's been positive. I'm glad that they're tamping down the expectations from this particular summit. I think that expectations were wildly and unjustifiably high in the approach to the previous summit. There was a lot of talk of almost unilateral disarmament, denuclearization of the North. I thought that was way too over-optimistic. But, okay, so they're moving in the right direction, and I think it's a good thing. If I want to move to the other side of the world and talk about Iran, I think that it's, that has to play out still. I was never a fan of the deal that they signed.
No, I don't.
For a lot of
the brain would be
for a lot of reasons, and so I think that Trump was quite right in pulling the United States out of that deal, and the Europeans are, as much as they're talking about wanting to maintain the deal, I think that they understand the problems with it. And so, that we'll have to see how that plays out as well. Where else? We're still all waiting for his Middle East peace plan, whatever that's going to be.
Yeah, well, I didn't say he was successful on every front. First of all, I didn't like it when Obama did it, announcing, okay, we're going home on July 15th. Okay, that's it. The war's over. And announcing to everybody that the Americans were pretty much leaving Afghanistan.
You're referring to Syria now.
Yeah,
with
now
Trump.
Exactly, because Trump did exactly the same thing. It was a dumb idea under Obama, and it's a dumb idea. I don't care who the leader is. You never tell your enemy things like that.
Yeah, I would not have. I think that the Americans in Syria are not just a stabilizing influence, but I think that it's important that the Americans maintain a strong military presence in Syria. I don't know whether they're going to or not.
Doesn't look that way.
But it's regrettable if they don't, because they are a counterbalance to the Iranians.
Oh, Iranians, okay.
And to the Russians as well. I'm still not entirely sure that I know what Russia's end game is in Syria. But I'm pretty sure I know what Iran's end game is in Syria.
Yeah, Iran's
and
made
I'm not
no
convinced.
Secret.
I'm not convinced that the Russians are going to be particularly effective deterrents to Iranian aspirations in that part of the world. I'm not 100% convinced that the Americans are going to be able to fill that role entirely, but I think I have a lot more trust that the Americans would, if it's possible, to fill the role of deterrent power. I think that they would fill that role more effectively than the Russians would. My concern, of course, is that if the Americans do pull out entirely and the Russians don't have a significant restraining influence on the Iranians in Syria, that you might find a very quickly an escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. Right now, they're fighting a low-level war in Syria. There's been some confrontation off and on between Iranian forces and Israeli forces, but it's very low level, it's very sporadic, it's very surgical, if you will, mostly on the Israeli side toward the Iranians. That could very easily spin out of control. So those would be my concerns. But I think overall, I think that Trump has accomplished, I'm not going to say a lot of good things. I think they're good things, but the main thing I think that people have to recognize is that, it's almost in spite of himself, okay, or maybe not in spite of himself, maybe because of his style, he's accomplished a lot of the things that he wants to accomplish. He's renegotiated NAFTA. You might have an opinion as to whether or not it should have been renegotiated, okay? Maybe yes, maybe no, but he had a goal of renegotiating, and the Canadians said no, and the Mexicans said no, and Trump said, well, yes. And eventually, we here in Canada and the Mexicans had to go along and come up with some adjustments. It wasn't as wholesale, perhaps, a change as people might have thought it would have been, but still, he's made some movement with the Chinese, so it goes on and on, and I think it's too early to say whether the Trump presidency has been successful. It's been entertaining. To be sure, successful. I think that on its own terms, I think that it's been far more successful, perhaps, than I would have expected. Of course, the one area that everybody's talking about these days that it appears that he may not be as successful on is actually building a border wall in the southern border. That's a separate issue altogether.
Yeah, we won't dive into that pool because there's another little piece of information I want to float out there. I was just, while you were talking, I went over to Twitter, found a story over there that talks about a fundraiser Doug Ford had in Ontario. Have you seen this yet? $1,250 a plate fundraising dinner.
So I hear.
3,200 people bought a plate. $4 million in one night. It's a record in Ontario.
Yeah, and my understanding is that, that there were a lot of I hear there was a lot of arm twisting to get certain people to come to it, but good for them.
$4 million is a lot of money. And whether it was arm twisting or not, let's face it, that says something. And when he can talk about that, however they got them there, by hook or by crook, then the bottom line is, unless somebody holds a pistol to your head, they can't force you to write a check. They can't force you to go. They can certainly suggest strongly you go, but they can't make you go. So the fact these people open up their wallets to $1,250 per person, which is also the maximum amount you can give to a political party, as if I understand the donation laws correctly.
It's approximately that anyway.
You were right in the ballpark.
Right, provincially.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, provincial, yes. But $4 million in one night? Nobody's done that. Not even Kathleen Wynne or Dalton McGuinty can approach those numbers. So it speaks to me that there's a lot of people out there who are willing to open their wallets to Doug Ford in ways they were unwilling to open their wallets to for other political leaders. Isn't that right, Patrick Brown? I'm sorry, they just didn't do it. And this is going to go in the war chest. This is going to make it's going to help with advertising. Well, you know what they're going to spend it on. So they might even spend it on his van. Who knows?
Yeah, there's a controversy around his van. I understand. Right.
He had an SUV, wanted air conditioning or something in.
I don't know.
Yeah, look, in the scheme of scandals, it's not much of a scandal. Compared to what we're looking at on Parliament Hill.
What did they do with the van?
He wanted it specialized. Apparently he wanted air conditioning or something in it.
Gosh, not air conditioning in your van.
And maybe I'm wrong, but that's as my memory is working, going back to the story. The liberal press tried to make a big deal out of it, and it lasted like 2 days at the most in the news cycle and just died. Because most people go, oh, well.
Well, look, if with everything going on in Ottawa right now with this scandal, I mean, if you're going to have a scandal at Queen's Park, now's the time to have it. Yeah, because nobody will pay attention to it. Let's face facts.
As a matter of fact, my colleague Brian Lilly, I had a conversation with him the other day over the phone, and he took a job with Sun Media and left the terrestrial radio station here in Ottawa, and I won't go into those details. I'm not at liberty to.
Of course.
But he was supposed to go and cover Queen's Park.
Right.
Well, for the first 3 weeks that he worked for Sun, he spent every day up on the hill here in Ottawa covering the SNC scandal.
Right.
And I must admit, that's his insights are some of the sources of my information. Because we had that conversation and he shared with me some stuff. I am not revealing anything that hasn't already been published, but I'm just saying that, I talked to Brian and I trust him implicitly. He's a great guy, a solid journalist, and I really enjoyed whenever I had a chance to work with him, and I do trust his judgment. So, to have a scandal. Now, this scandal about the van goes back to the very earliest days of Doug's not campaign, but office in governance since he took over. Now, okay, it's probably a rookie mistake, and I think most people were willing to forgive it in the heady days that surrounded the first 100 days of him being in office. So it's in other words, it's a tempest in a teapot. Should he have done it? No. Do other politicians do it? Of course.
I still don't know what he did. I still don't know what the scandal is. But I did see it it did cross my news feed today.
Did it?
It did. Something, and I'm going, what is this? And I saw some drawing or diagram of a minivan, or a van. I don't know whether it was a minivan or not. There was a diagram, and it had something to do with the diagram. These are the changes that Doug Ford wanted in his van.
I just dug it up. Do you know how much this whole thing cost? Now, it's a lot for a van.
Okay. Well, what?
$50,000.
$50,000.
$50,000.
Was it $50,000 worth of renovations?
That's what the modification.
With the modifications.
The headline is, Doug Ford's van customization has a $50,000 price tag, documents show. This is from the CBC. Okay, and it is dated, why don't they put the date at the top like they're supposed to be? February 25th. So, that's relatively new, but so what? I mean, I'm not saying so what? I'm saying that they waste more on paper clips.
Okay, listen, let's set aside, we have 2 minutes left here.
Oh, really?
We have to forget about Doug Ford, because you mentioned the magic words, the magic letters.
Oh.
CBC.
I did.
Okay. I have to tell you, I watched the CBC News World Online broadcast.
You were a brave man.
The streaming coverage of the by-elections.
Right.
It was awful. It wasn't that it was biased. It wasn't that it was leaning left or right or anything like that.
Yeah. It was just awful.
It was just terrible.
Well,
and Nick, you and I, let's get ready for it. We are going to do an election special. We'll get a couple of other people involved.
okay.
We will do I promise our listeners, when the time comes, we will do a far, far better job at analyzing and presenting the results of the election than the CBC did with only 3 ridings. It was, if you have the opportunity to go, I don't know if they archive these videos. They must somewhere.
CBC.
But if you have the opportunity to go online and download the CBC broadcast for the by-elections on September 25th, I highly recommend that you do it, because it was farcical. It was like a Saturday Night Live script where people weren't even on the set when they were supposed to be on the set, and then they were getting up and going to it. It was comical. Anyway, it was.
I'll have to go and find that, I will admit. Now, in the last moment of the show, I want to remind people again, we are going to have a special guest next week.
Yes.
Steve Skivington.
Steve Skivington.
Yes.
We'll be talking about his new book on healthcare reform.
Yeah, that's right. I talked to him on the phone. He sounds like a great guy.
He is.
A great interview.
I've known Steve for many years.
Okay.
He's a sharp guy, knows what he's talking about. Looking forward to it.
I am too. And with that said, I guess we're going to have to wrap it up for this edition of the Combat Zone.
Okay, so don't forget, donate.
If you like what you hear.
If you like what you hear, don't forget to tell people about us.
And it helps keep the website free.
And please join us in next week and join in with us. Join us in.
Join with us next week for more
with us next week
of conservative talk radio.
Okay.
I got to work on his finish.
I know. I realized I started
again
after everything I said about the CBC.
And he comes out with that. Oh, well. All right, folks.
Okay,
Good night. We'll see you all again next week.
You got it.